KHM.com. What's the name of the show?
What is it?
Thinking Real Estate.
Real Estate.
Totally distracted
Yay.
today.
So last night we'll start out with giving my sister some accolades. I went to the Kiwanis of Columbus Awards dinner, and my
The
sister.
Knights of Columbus.
Oh yeah, you know what? I don't have my glasses on.
Did she say Kiwanis?
She did.
Knights of Columbus.
Okay.
And my sister won.
Yeah, she
I'm very proud of her.
distinguished.
Let me tell you the exact title. Outstanding Alumni Award.
No.
She gave a very nice speech.
I'm
Her
sorry
daughter
I met-
introduced her. Lauren did a great job.
Great. I'm sorry I missed that.
Yeah, it was a really nice program. And then Brady Hoke, I have his autograph. I have a picture with me.
Did you put that on
Facebook?
Facebook?
I haven't yet. I'll try.
Is it you sure this is your sister? She's really good looking.
Oh. That's who I get my good looks from.
That's Betsy.
Wow. Patrick Birch in the background.
So anyhow, so congratulations to my sister Betsy Youngdahl. She does work really hard for the Catholic school system, fundraising. She's one of the best fundraisers out there.
Father Jim.
And she's committed. And I gotta say, Father Tim was the MC, and he said some jokes my husband would say, which I thought was really funny. I'm not telling you what they are on the air, though.
She said
It's your show.
she's
There.
been committed.
What? So I have Pat Birch with us today, and because Bill is on
Well, who's he?
assignment. Pat Birch is. I thought everyone knew who he was.
No, I don't think
It's like,
everybody
does everybody know who Brady Hoke is?
No.
Oh,
I'm no Brady Hope.
he looks like Chris Christie, I think.
Oh, you're
Brady Hope?
Brady Hoke.
No, you, yeah, you don't. No.
You look like Mitt Romney.
Oh yeah, thanks.
I don't know what to tell you. So I brought Pat. Pat's my backup,
Pat
along
is
with
the
Ron Ellison.
city
I've only got
manager.
quality backup people. So
Yeah. City manager.
city manager
Patrick
of
Birch.
Jackson.
Do you go by Pat or Patrick?
Patrick, I think.
Does it
Okay.
matter?
It doesn't really
Does
matter.
it
I've been
ma-
called worse, believe me.
Well,
I call you Pat. I don't call you Patrick.
We should.
I assume.
Mr. Birch.
I assume if they use a full name, you're mad at you.
I like that.
Okay.
Patrick.
Yeah, that's a,
You know, wouldn't your
Patrick.
mother yell at you and say your full name?
Sometimes.
Gregory.
My mom did
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah. I heard that quite often.
So we didn't know what we were going to talk about, but I ran into a constituent last night at the Knights of Columbus event, and they mentioned this Brad Flory column
Yeah.
about turning our one-way streets into two-way streets.
Okay.
And the intention is to look at the viability of turning Glick Highway in Washington into the loop around the downtown into two ways.
Yeah.
And so
Is that kind of a done deal?
nothing's done. You gotta have. First of all, it's got to make sense.
Right.
Second of all, the council has to approve it, right?
Right.
Right. Then you got to fund it. You got to make it all happen.
And we have to study it for 50 grand.
We have to, well, that's a pretty reasonable amount because the company doing the study had already done a study for MDOT on Michigan Avenue, correct?
They did it on the whole loop on signaling,
Okay.
but that was a state paid for study.
Right. So we're just tagging
But
on
you
to
know, the
that.
constituents don't like to hear that. But
Well-
that is a necessity, isn't it?
It's an absolute necessity. What constituents would more likely than not really not like would be that if we built something that we had no traffic study to back up and it didn't work. So the studies that were done, I think the article referred to a study done many, many years ago when traffic counts were up, there was 23,000 cars a day, and Louis Glick carries about 16,000 cars a day at peak, and Washington about 13,000 cars a day. The argument surrounds
Today.
today.
Not back then.
Back then.
Yeah.
So there's far fewer cars on the roads. And we even know there's far fewer cars on 994 now than there were 20 years ago. So we have to recognize that our population is changing and how they move around towns and cities and villages. So we look at this and say at some point, you remember that big piece of property there that Mr. Gillespie has an option on downtown, the whole Carnegie District? he can't get anybody to locate there because traffic is one way at 45 miles an hour and you can't find a way to turn around, and that's even from local people. So at some point, if downtown is going to resurge, even one of the things in Midtown, one of the first things they said when they came here, when consumers and the Acre Initiative started, is that one of their comments was the first thing you got to do, and we already planned looking at this anyway, is that you got to turn these one-way pairs that are not the ones on the residential areas on Franklin and Washington. Those are fine and nobody's touching those. But we're talking about the Louis Glick Washington Loop. Have got to get to the point where you can move traffic freely back and forth so that you can actually have commerce actually happen. And I'll tell you, back in the 70s and 80s, people did a lot of one-way streets in downtowns and realized that what they found is that they got more parking, but if you don't have traffic count, businesses fail.
But if you don't have traffic count, if you don't have people coming to the businesses, you don't need parking.
That's right.
Yeah. You don't need businesses.
Well, that's exactly right.
So remember, the studies here, what the state did is a timing study. What we are doing is a traffic count study to see where each intersection that has a 90-degree or something less that comes into Washington or Glick, what would happen if those were two-way? What would the turning movements be? That's what you have to do for that type of a study. It would be incredibly irresponsible to perform a project like this without studying it. And I know there's been some comments in MLive and so on about people, this study for this, and they're concerned that we do a lot of studies, which is exactly what we're doing, just the opposite of. We're trying to, if we don't incorporate a study unless we think there's a good chance we're actually do it. And not 10 years from now, not 15 years from now, but as soon as we possibly can, because at some point we got to stop studying stuff, put them on the shelves, and actually do something.
Well,
so residential Washington would remain
yes.
Yes.
the one way.
Right, and I was a little disappointed in the column because I don't think Brad picked up the phone to call anybody to find out what the current situation is, and he refers back to our mayor of 40 years ago, which is, if you want Jackson to remain the same and look 40 years ago, then I don't know how to respond to that.
Well,
They had 20,000 more people
Yeah.
40 years ago.
Right.
Jackson's half as big as it was 40 years ago.
Right, I guess if we didn't move forward and progress on projects, then we would still have dirt roads and places for you to tie up your horses, right?
Well, what was Brad complaining about?
You obviously didn't read the article.
No, I didn't.
Well, I hadn't read
I
it
missed
until
it.
last night. I should have highlighted. I read it completely. He was quoting Phil Conley, who I'm sure at the time made sense.
That was planning thought of that day.
Right. But today we have fewer cars. We have a struggling downtown. I'll give you a perfect example. I was in Kalamazoo this past fall, and Kalamazoo has, it's either 4 or 5 lane, one-way loop around their downtown. I was in the 4th lane. I saw a store I wanted to go to. But because I was in the 4th lane and traffic was moving so fast, I opted not to go to that store, and I continued on my way out of town.
The reason they call them business loops and bypasses because they bypass the businesses.
Yeah.
And you know, we look at this, and I think some of the comments there were made that you know, you'd have to widen Louis Glick. That we understand the 2002 study. There was kind of a mock-up that the city had done with MDOT, and it said at that time they said it had to go to 5 lanes on Louis Glick to accommodate that kind of traffic. Well, there's a new AASHTO standard. There's a new ASTM standard out there now that talks about the feds have a different standard now than the state. We're trying to reconcile that. The state Department of Transportation has been fantastic to work with, and they're helping us all understand, them and us, whether or not what type of level of service, traffic service, can you live with, right? It's not really about a set in stone paradigm about how much traffic goes on every road per day. But remember that there are some they gave the example, Mark Gragioli and Paul Ajaba from MDOT gave us an example. Main Street in Ann Arbor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's a bypass. But you know what? There are times of that day where it's very difficult.
Backed up.
And from what we understand, what they tell us, Ann Arbor doesn't want that changed. They don't want it 5 lanes. I mean, because of what it would do to the neighborhood, and because it feeds a tremendous amount of businesses. And a lot of times, even when you go to a restaurant, how many restaurants do you stop at that have 2 cars parked outside in the evening? you tend to go to restaurants that have 3/4 parking lots full or full because you think, wow, it must be a good restaurant. Same thing with a road. You got a road that's traveled like that. The issue is, do we even have to widen Louis Glick? Because that would make it very difficult, very expensive. The bridge over the river would have to be replaced. You'd have businesses, there'd be right-of-ways to purchase. And that's why we put mast arms on Washington. So it's not as if we're not thinking ahead. We paid a difference for those black mast arms that are going on Washington and Jackson and Washington and Mechanic, because we knew that if it converted to 3 ways, Washington's curb lines wouldn't have to change. The reason they're clear span wires that are being renovated by the state on Louis Glick is because at the time they thought it had to be widened. And we couldn't make that decision that quickly before their project let. So right now, we're dealing with them trying to figure out what has to happen. We believe that if it goes to 3 lanes, and this is from MDOT's own thought process, that if it goes to 3 lanes, you can actually road diet, which means the road becomes a little narrower, you got room for a very large walk trail or bike trail outside the pavement that's not a bike lane, kind of connecting interstate trails.
On the downtown side of the community.
Greening up
Right.
this corridor. That's what's going to help bring this downtown back, and we would be remiss in our duty as public officials to ignore the idea. We'd absolutely be remiss.
What's the business reaction?
We've had great response. I've not heard, I mean, I'm sure after we make this radio show we'll get some negative stuff.
Right.
But
Right.
I haven't heard one negative, except for when Laura read me the article last night when she
Yeah,
called
and
me,
I was
like,
just,
what?
I was just floored by this article because he did not talk to anybody about what's happening today. And we can't base our decisions on 40 years ago. That would just be stupidity.
That'd be tough.
Yeah. I mean, 40 years ago, I was 15 years old and could care less what was going on with roads, right?
I mean, Brad does a great job.
Yeah.
You know, and I understand the articles he writes, and at some point, I think, you know, summoning back on the mayor, I get that, but at some point we have to move forward, and you're right, we would have liked the opportunity to at least get out there what we're really trying to accomplish by doing this, and it's not, and we just don't look at one project and say that's the end all, it's going to save Jackson. We had this conversation 2.5 years ago, almost 3 years ago on this radio show about an overall economic development strategy that had a number of different components that had to have happen in order for to have some kind of a nexus that drove us forward. These are one of those projects that have to happen to be able to mix. And believe me, I wouldn't propose it to council. And actually, Laura had brought it up originally and wouldn't leave me alone about it. But I tell you, it made sense. It makes complete sense to do this.
Well, and the good thing is we don't have to acquire property to make it happen. The likelihood of using, to converting it in the space that's already existing is very strong. So that's the good news.
That's the key, isn't it?
And you know, the other thing that's mentioned in this article is about safety, that one-way streets are safety. Well, there's new studies that show that that's not true. We need to slow traffic down. We need to accommodate pedestrians and bicyclists. Our community, not our community, but society has become obese. And it's because we sit in our cars, we sit behind computers, and we watch TV and listen to the radio, of course.
She likes it from that standpoint. I take it from an economic standpoint.
Yeah. Well,
if we're spending money to make money. We're not going to do anything as a city that isn't going to promote tax-based growth in the future. And that doesn't mean take more dollars out of the same people. That means have more people and more businesses to share the load. And we've got to invest in our infrastructure. We got to invest and make the infrastructure run the right way and actually promote what we're actually trying to promote.
So two-way you feel will bring more to the business community?
I believe it'll substantially enhance the investment downtown, not just publicly but privately.
it's also going to be a better connector from East Michigan Avenue to West Michigan Avenue,
Direct.
especially heading east. And Michigan Avenue between 3rd and Brown Street is going to be torn up in 2017.
So MDOT's doing a brand new tear out of pavement between Louis Glick and Brown anyway.
Yeah. And they're going down. In fact, one of our engineers thinks they might even find tracks under the pavement, but
We'll see.
who knows? It'd be kind of fun.
Jimmy Hoffa. So how would that
All
would
connect.
that just run through the same path?
Yeah, the intention is that
Down Louis
Michigan-
Glick, I'm talking about.
Yeah, it would be Michigan Avenue, and you'd have to name something else
Okay.
in honor of the Glick family, because obviously they've done so much for this community. So at some point,
So
you've
we'd
gotta
be
figure-
back to a Michigan Ave, which
A
we were in the
which would be
past.
straight through.
Yeah.
A contiguous
basically.
one.
It would curve a little bit, but there wouldn't be right turns and it'd be continuous. The right turn would be Washington off of Louis Glick, or left and right turns off of Michigan, the new Michigan Avenue. So, but and I'll tell you, we've converted 3 roads to two-way, and we've got nothing but positive comments. It gives you a whole different perspective. I was talking to Bart Harley yesterday, and he was saying, you know, it's amazing the different perspective you get when you drive down, or you're walking the other way on Louis Glick, or you come down Lansing Ave. People have to kind of think it. They come down Blackstone. You come down and look at the city at dusk, and you see the lights in the building, and you think, wow, this town is really magnificent. No, seriously, it's a whole different view. I noticed it the other
camera
night.
on, Greg.
Wow, that's,
I noticed
I'm gonna
it.
try that.
Take a look at dusk, drive down, and come down off that hill and look at downtown Jackson with the lights coming on and stuff. It really gives you a whole different perspective of Jackson. And there's many people, people who've been here a long time and saw it once when it wasn't one way, will remember it, and they'll think, wow, this is, and people got, you know, we gave a lot of people, when we had a lot of population here, we gave people, and a lot of cities did this, it wasn't just Jackson, we gave a lot of people the way to get out of downtowns, but no easy way to get back.
Right.
We got to stop that. That's
And Blackstone, Lansing, Cooper, and Francis all changing and going to 2 ways have taken traffic off of the main streets, which will help with that this 2-way conversion. So
We're out of
I'm
time.
gonna do a shout out to Brad and ask him to call and get some facts before he writes his next little commentary.
Oh, great.
he's a great writer.
Yeah.
Jeez.
All right, call me. We need listings. They're selling like hotcakes.
What's your number?
780-3800. Plus, we have a master plan process coming up. Look for that starting April 10, which is citizens are encouraged to come and participate in helping define our city.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you.
Patrick Birch.